Look, I don't care if you're on an airplane, on a transatlantic flight. I don't care if you're at the gym wearing your unitard with the part in the back on your butt that's a little bit stretched out and worn thin that nobody's had the courage to tell you about yet. I don't care if you're in the backyard wearing your jean shorts where the pockets stick out a little bit underneath where you cut them off and your American flag bandana. Wherever you are, I want you to immediately shriek out the correct answer to the following questions, okay? I'm going to give you an animal, and then you just shriek at the top of your lungs what you think that animal means without any context whatsoever. It's going to work out. Ready? Go. Fox. Correct. Shark. Mostly correct. Lemming. Yep, that's how they are. Am I right? Pig. Okay, that's hurtful. Bear. Look out. Hawk. Congratulations, you nailed it. You completely dominated because guess what? Everybody even remotely familiar with our culture knows that certain animals mean certain attributes. And if somebody gets called a certain animal, it means certain things, whether positive or negative. And this is one of those places where that natural social intuition you've spent your whole life developing, except for the fact that you are wearing that worn through unitard and that you got those butterfly wings stamped on your lower back. Other than that, your intuition is usually spot on. And it's going to pay off here as we look at Matthew 10 verse 16, because we have 4 animals that Jesus brings up as he's trying to explain what the big picture deal is with what people are going to run into when they go out on their big quest to tell people about the kingdom out in the great wide world. He invokes 4 animals, and all 4 of these animals mean something. Now, I'm going to submit to you that 3 of these animals mean exactly what you think, and that the 4th one is a little bit sneaky. And it's ironic that it's sneaky because that's actually kind of what goes with the title. So here's where we're at. We're in the second great big speech that Matthew is structuring his book around. This one is called the Missional Discourse. The first one was the Sermon on the Mount. And the Missional Discourse, which is a name we assign to it after the fact, is Jesus sending people out and being like, hey, it's going to be your job to go and tell people about the kingdom. And so we've just got done over the last couple of weeks or so looking at the happy part of this commissioning where it's like, hey, go get them. Here, you're well equipped. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. And then the less happy part of it where he's like, yeah, people should recognize me as the king and you as my bannerman. But if they don't, you got to kind of blow that stuff off. And I tell you, they really should get it. And if they whiff on that and they don't get it, it's a gigantic, colossal miss because these people's whole lives theoretically, religiously, and culturally have been about looking for this king who is to arrive, and now the king is here. And so the final bit of this opening foray of the missional discourse and this big commissioning happens in verse 16, and it's probably the pivotal verse of the entire discourse. It goes like this: I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. I'm going to break this thing down. Let's just play the animal game again, right? All right, the first comparison of animals is sheep and wolves. Hey, remember we talked about this sheep thing? This is cool. I love it when it's like we have history and we've been doing stuff together. And like, remember that time when we were hanging out and we did the thing? We have that here. So the sheep deal, remember? This is an image that gets used in the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's obviously not totally a compliment because sheep wander off and do dumb things and aren't particularly great at seeing the bigger picture, but the shepherd is good. And it is kind of a term of endearment because God always cares about his sheep in the Old Testament, and Jesus clearly cares about his sheep in the New Testament. I mean, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And he tells his disciples, like, hey, let's pray that God would raise up people to do something about that. So same language here in verse 16 as the one I just reeled off from the end of Matthew chapter 9. You guys are going out like sheep. There's an innocence and a purity to what you're doing, a purity to your message and to your quest. But not everybody you meet is going to be totally on the same page. Some of them just aren't going to be into it, but some of them are going to be actually really mad about it and openly hostile about it. Some of those, of course, will be very overt in their hostility. Others will be a little bit more subtle. But one way or another, you're not going out into this tabula rasa world where nobody has any preconceived notions about the sheep message you are bearing. You're going out where there are some preconceived notions, and you can expect that at times you're going to be met with a degree of hostility. So sheep, that one's not too tough because we spent a lot of time on it. But wolves, what does a wolf mean? Go ahead, shriek it out right now. You don't actually have to. I guess we're done with the game part. But a wolf, well, that's somebody who's a little bit sneaky and cunning and clever. And admittedly, all the other things that I could draw on to illustrate how in our culture and language, wolf means this or sheep means that, all of those are born out of this exact passage. So It's kind of a dirty trick, but I mean, come on, Little Red Riding Hood, you get the wolf that's deceptive and wants to do tricky, cunning things because they want to satiate their bloodlust. You get the Wolf of Wall Street, it's very handsome, very cunning, very clever, puts a nice face on it, but deep down, vicious, ferocious. That character's there to win and is very, very aggressive. So this one's not tough. The sheep are the good guys, if maybe a little bit naive. The wolves are the bad guys, clever and aggressive, and that doesn't seem like a very fair fight. And indeed, throughout history and the animal world, it isn't. Which is why you get the second half of this little phrase here. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Oh, clever. So Jesus isn't saying, like, that's just how it is. Like, you're going to have to be the prey. You're going to have to get beat on. You're going to have to take this abuse because there's no way for you to actually get around it. No, rather in the spirit of it's dangerous to go alone. Take this. Let me equip you with some things that we saw earlier in the missional discourse. Jesus gives them some guidance about how to think of themselves. Don't just think of yourself as this naive sheep who's wandering out into danger. Rather, be alert, size things up. Now, serpent here is something that we generally associate with sneaky and bad and duplicitous, maybe kind of like the wolf, maybe a little bit different. It's defensive and it coils up and it looks like it couldn't really do any damage, and then boom, it hits you. And the kind of damage it does isn't the ripping, shredding aggression of the wolf where it's over in a hurry. It's poison, it's toxic, it's slow. So we think of that kind of stuff. And believe me, Jesus was well aware of the imagery of the serpent in the garden from Genesis. But here Jesus is putting a positive spin on the serpent. Like, hey, look at how calculating that thing is. Look at the way it is very aware of its surroundings. It knows danger when it sees it. And a serpent is really good at staying alive. It knows when to go underground. It knows when to come out. And in fact, Jesus himself even avoids mortal danger here in the early going of what he's doing because he's not done setting up the whole kingdom thing yet. And eventually, this is a really dark metaphor, but I think you get what I'm doing here. Eventually, he comes out of his hole and exposes himself to danger, and the danger is right there waiting for him a few chapters down the road when he makes his way to Jerusalem and ultimately gets sent to the cross and execution for all of this. So the way to avoid the bloodbath that would be unmitigated, unqualified sheep among wolves is shrewdness. It's awareness of the circumstances. It's taking on that positive attribute of the serpent, but not at the expense of being on team good guy. You still got to wear white if you're a part of the kingdom, because remember all those kingdom values back here in the Beatitudes at the beginning of Matthew chapter 5? You know, all this stuff about blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who hunger, blessed are the merciful. You can't pitch all of that the second you go from, wow, I'd like to sign up to the kingdom, to, wow, I'd like to go represent the kingdom. Representing the kingdom is those values. The kingdom is those things. And I suppose if your messaging about the kingdom violates all of the principles and characteristics of the kingdom, you're not really messaging for the kingdom anymore. You're messaging for something else and totally undermining your spoken value of being a representative of this kingdom because you don't believe anything, you don't do anything that has to do with it. So you get the shrewdness element that Jesus presents as a remedy to the sheep among wolves bloodbath potential situation. But then that gets tempered with, you still got to do what's right. You still got to care about what's right. And the dove might be a little easier to catch, might take a little bit of a beating, but combining these two sets of animal virtues together somehow, again, seems to mitigate the really unfortunate description of sheep against wolves, which just obviously isn't going to work out. Now, I told you at the beginning that I think this is the pivotal verse in the whole missional discourse. I also think it's among the most important verses in all of Matthew for setting up a trajectory for what the kingdom is and for answering the obvious question everybody must be asking, which is, what do I do? Where do I fit? What does it look like for me to go out and do this thing, especially if there's no physical Jesus around? How do I interact with the world that sometimes is cool about it and sometimes they're just not really fans? How do I avoid being a chump who goes out and gets it wrong and makes enemies out of people who wouldn't need to be enemies and who might be receptive or at the very least nice and tolerant toward this thing? There's a whole lot of layers of meaning here and we ain't done yet. So we're going to be back in Matthew 10:16 tomorrow. Thank you for playing the What Do the Animals Mean game with me. I'm sorry for any social consequences that might have, but hey, you chose to listen to this podcast and to play along with every single set of rules that we put forth. So thank you for that, and I hope good comes of it. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.